Welcome everybody to this session on open standards. I'm Priyanka Seshadri, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. This discussion is basically going to be a behind the scenes look at 4 amazing archives and the standards that they've adopted and developed for their work. This ranges from collecting material to cataloging, documenting metadata, facilitating public access, and of course, looking at issues of ethics and consent and various other aspects of the work that they do. I work currently in the museum sector, and previously I've worked in oral history and community archiving. And for me, one question that's always fascinated me is how standards are adopted and developed, and also how organizations do this, taking on board time constraints, budget constraints, etc., and the creativity that comes out of these challenges. So I'm very interested in hearing from our speakers on some of these questions. We have with us 4 speakers, Menaka Neotia from the Sahapedia archive, Avehi Menon, who is archive director at Sarmaya Arts Foundation, Dr. Shubha Chaudhuri, who is Associate Director General at the Archives and Research Center for Ethnomusicology in Gurgaon, and last but not least, Venkat Srinivasan from the NCBS archives. Just to go over the structure for the session, each speaker will speak for 10 minutes, which will be followed by a 20-minute question and answer session. As Sangeeta had mentioned, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat box. You can drop them as and when the presentations are happening, and we will make sure that they are posed to the speakers during the Q&A. So yeah, if you don't want to put your question in the chat box and you wish to ask your question verbally, just raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can ask your question. So without further ado, Menaka, over to you. Let me just...
Hi, everybody. I'm just sharing my screen. Okay, I'm going to speak about the backend archiving at Sahapedia. And I would like to mention that when I joined Sahapedia, I had no knowledge about how to do archiving. And so I went to Shubha, who's also here with us, and I'm deeply grateful to her. So she asked me really informed questions to think about. And I think that has gone a long way in shaping the archives, because that helped me develop logic and use my common sense to build the archives. And I think that is really, really important. So at Sahapedia, we curate our own data. All our data is available online. It's digital. And we also collaborate with institutions and researchers. So I'll give you a little glimpse of how we do the archiving. We were able to create a structure. So the first question to ask is, what are the archives for? For us, the purpose was to record the information for preservation and retrieval for our internal teams. So, and how are we going to record it, and what are we going to record? So the data that we have are articles, images, audios, and photos. They were all over the place. So the first thing we had to do is consolidate it and then remove duplicates and make folders and label the files. So we decided to record persistent things and characteristics. So there is a folder level information and there is a file level information. So persistent things like type, size, name of the author, and also for internal purposes, commissioning editor. We also record the contracts and consents against every file. So in case in the future, we do open up our backend archives, which also has the raw material for the published data. So we know what we can use and what permissions we have. So for this, we had to come up with two systems that are uniform to the whole Sahapedia team. One is the folder sorting, and second is file labeling. And we also created an archive entry form so that users can easily, so archiving is really meticulous and it requires a lot of hard work. And I'm the only person in my team. So instead of, it would be impossible for me to do all of the archiving alone. So we asked users itself to do a bit of metadata entry while submitting their published data to the archives. So with the help of our IT team, we got a VBA-enabled archive form made, and that collects file and folder level information. We also take a backup of all our data on cloud, and sometimes we have problems of lengthy titles and too many folders. So our folder structure is limited to 3 folders. There's a main folder, and inside that there are raw files and final files. And also we came up with a digital unique identity. It's an numerical unique digital identity, something like you see in libraries. So this we did so that there's accuracy for retrieval to overcome spelling errors, lengthy titles. So this is just a brief overview of that. And we have 2 records. We have a main archival record that is universal, uniform for all our teams. So, the things that can change is like we have different resources. We have outreach. We also do content generation. And now in content generation, supposing if we are doing archiving for Chhattisgarh, and then we have museum mapping. I'm just going to exit this. How do I stop sharing? So what we did is the catalog is uniform for all our teams. So for the Pune cultural mapping, they have something called like categories. They want to record blue plaques and other things. So certain things will be, the main titles remain the same of your catalog, but certain things can be flexible. So that in the long run, if something changes, you don't have to change, you don't have to go back and change everything in your catalog. So remember that also. And then automate as much as possible, because like I said, it's really meticulous and a lot of hard work goes into it. And the archives also evolve. They evolve with the data, they evolve with times. Like during the lockdown, we had to have a backup. Now we are connected to our servers so that everyone can work from home in the servers. So it's, and one thing that I find really interesting about archiving, that it's like a memory of every person who is directly and indirectly involved in the archives. So that is really exciting for me, and that keeps me going, because it can get really monotonous, and at times you wonder, why are you putting yourself through this? So I remind myself it's for the team and for the people, and it is so important at these times that we are curating data from the people who have worked on it and we're recording history in a very authentic, and so I think that's really important. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Menaka. Oh no, wait, where's my video? Okay. Uh, Thank you so much. Next, we have Avehi Menon, who will take us through the Sarmaya archive. Avehi has a background in oral history archiving and is also deeply interested in community engagement and participatory activities at museums and archives. So, Avehi, you can start.
Thank you, Priyanka. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Just give me a second. Sorry, guys. Okay, for some reason, it's not. Yeah.
Okay.
Has it come up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just a second. Okay, thank you. So, hi everyone. Sarmaya is a relatively young organization, and we're in the midst of developing processes and standards. So, what I'm going to do is sort of share our story on documentation processes and some of the things that we've been thinking through. Just to give you a quick introduction, Sarmaya Arts Foundation is a not-for-profit curated repository of art, artifacts, and living traditions from the Indian subcontinent. It is a private collection of Mumbai-based banker Paul Abraham and his partner Pavitra Rajaram. Founded in 2015, the collection is broadly divided into numismatics, cartography, etchings and engravings, photography, indigenous art, and modern and contemporary art. The intent is really to make the collections accessible to a larger audience and create an engagement with art, history, and heritage. We are a virtual museum in the sense that we don't have a physical exhibition or gallery space, but rather an archive that houses the museum collections, records, and the staff. We have a small dedicated team that does collections management, research, curatorial, and outreach. So we sort of function within two spaces, the physical archive and virtual space, which is our website, which is our user interface, our audience interface. To take you through the archive hosts more than 5,000 objects and over 8,000 books, and it's accessible to the public only on an appointment basis. We also have digital records, which are records of the collection of administrative records, documentation of all of the outreach and public programming that we do, which is stored on site as well as on off-site storage devices, which is regularly backed up. The library is something that's the newest addition to the archive, and it's currently traditionally cataloged in the form of a spreadsheet, but it is available on our website for researchers to access before they visit the library. Okay, just to take you some of our key processes of cataloging and documentation. Like any other private collection, Sarmaya focused on setting up and organizing the physical archive, and we initially cataloged objects on Microsoft Excel. But as the collections and the team evolved, we migrated systematically to Google Sheets. We still actively and judiciously use Google Sheets, but we're in the process of developing a collections management system, which I'll touch upon a little later. And of course, like any other documentation practice in this field, we began by adapting standards and guidelines published by ICOM CDOC. But we've learned over the years and through experience and working with the archive, and we've adapted those standards to address our requirements. To take you through some of the steps in terms of the process when an object arrives at the archive, the first thing, of course, is inspection of the objects, and then recording of primary information or cataloging. This entails accessioning the object, establishing a category, physical condition reports, recording acquisition information, which is source, place, date, valuation, and assigning a location for storage within the archive. Step two is we take a closer look at the object. So we review an object's identity, the title, artist, provenance. We research the subject in more detail, the subject matter. We research the creator, contributor, material, technique information, and then we collate references about the object. This is, of course, a continuous process. As we come across richer information at later stages, we keep updating our object information sheets. Additionally, Sarmaya has its own glossary, which is relevant to the collection, and this is assigned at this point. This helps in locating objects specific to topics and subjects that are relevant to us and that we largely deal with. The third step is, or the fourth step rather, is digitization, which is done, of course, as part of documentation and for front-end accessibility for our website. Photography and video are some of our primary methods of digitizing the collection. And the files are maintained, like I said, both on-site as well as off-site. But with digitization, we digitize our objects on a case-by-case basis. So just to give you an example, with our rare books collection, what we do at the moment is we don't digitize the rare book collection entirely. So we currently photograph 5 aspects of the books as a process of documentation: the cover, the title page, frontispiece, and 1 or 2 critical illustrations. But in this process of documentation and over the years, it was really important for us to think about and implement long-term solutions where we could safeguard our data. And as our needs of accessing and reusing the archive diversified, it was really important for us to think about a cost-effective collections management system. So we're in the process right now of working with a tech team to develop and transform an open access software system. We're using collective access, and we're tweaking it to integrate our priorities. Some of the things I think it'll help us with, some of the primary things is, of course, breaking down documentation into a series of individual procedures. So, curatorial information, registration dates, exhibitions and loans. The other thing it'll help us with is, right now we're in the process of, interacting and building relationships with living artists. So at some point, if we have videos and audio interviews with these artists, we'd be able to upload that media into our CMS system. What we've also struggled with is the use of standardized and controlled vocabulary, which will be corrected within the CMS that we built. There's a certain limitation when we used spreadsheets. And so here, what we're doing with the CMS system is building a controlled vocabulary. And what we're referring to is the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, as well as the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names. And generally what this will do is make our data more consistent, valuable, not only in-house, but of course, sharing on the website. Just to take you through quickly what we do with our website, it's of course our user audience interface. And what you see in the image is an object from the collection. So we've been continuously uploading objects, metadata information, contextual information about the collections online. This is, of course, apart from all the other content that we have on the website. So the website serves as an archive of its own. And what an integrated CMS will do is, be able to interconnect that public-facing site as well as our internal cataloging and make the sharing of our collections online faster, as well as make our resources more comprehensive and enduring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avehi. That was really short as well. So I think we are doing really well with time. So we'll have Dr. Shubha Chaudhuri speak next on the Archive and Research Center for Ethnomusicology in Gurgaon. Shubha, do you want to begin your presentation?
Yeah. Hi. Hello, everyone. This is going very well, a great session. I'd like to just start with wanting to thank Venkat and his team for putting together this amazing online event. I think maybe this is the future, and though I think it makes a great difference to meet each other and have a cup of coffee, I think this is a great substitute. So I'm going to try and deal with the range of issues that Venkat and Priya told us about. And so this is going to be a tough one. Okay, all right. So this is a little difficult to deal with the whole range of issues that they wanted us to deal with. So I'm going to try and give kind of a bird's eye view over all these issues and hope to deal with maybe the questions in the question session if people have any specific issues that they want to deal with. So I thought we would use this phrase that Venkat introduced with, which is to say, okay, oh no, forget it, was that we should think of unpacking the archive when we are go into this session. So that's going to be my intention here. To start with, I'm giving you a very bland and straightforward definition from Wikipedia about what an archive is. And I think that's because there are so many kinds of archives today. And I still find that after all these years, I find that I can still identify very much with this particular definition. So this is the kind of archive we are talking about: selected material, long-term preservation, and looking at our enduring value. And that the archival records are normally unpublished and unique materials. So just to introduce where I come from, the Archives and Research Center for Ethnomusicology, we are in Gurgaon. And as you can imagine, we put everything into our names, into our name rather. So we are, I think the two pillars on which our work stands is A, we're an audiovisual archive, and B, that we are an ethnomusicology archive. So what that means is material which is music in social and cultural context, and the study of music making from all over the world and in all kinds of situations. So that's the kind of material we deal with. So these are the two areas we kind of juggle with when we deal with our archiving work. So tell you a little bit more about how the material comes in. We had started in 1982 with a very strong agenda for repatriation, for bringing to India collections that were otherwise not available to people in India. So this continues as part of our activities to uh, keep trying to bring such collections of audio largely and some more recent video collections as well. The way the archives functions is through voluntary deposit by scholars, institutions, collectors. That means people enter into an agreement with how they want the collections used, and they become part of the archive to be made available to others. We also do projects from time to time which bring in certain amount of material. We've done a few collaborative archiving projects, and we also do our own fieldwork documentation projects. I find in trying to go over all the issues that we were trying to deal with in this session, if I kind of bring it all down, I felt that preservation, organizing, and providing access kind of covers our entire area that we're talking about. And preservation, as you can see, I feel is where the key is. In the end, if an archive cannot preserve, then we cannot provide access, and what we do in the future will not matter. And it influences, I feel, all our policies. It influences our standards. It influences how we catalog, how we curate, how we organize, and how we decide to provide access. Very often, access and preservation are at kind of odds with each other, as many people know who are dealing with fragile materials. So coming to standards and policies, I feel these are the four main areas where we are, where we deal with standards and policies. Policies are very essential for every archive, as I'm sure you all know and have tried to deal with. And our policies then must incorporate standards. So whether it's for preservation or for cataloging and metadata, for ethics and access, all of these have standards that we can follow. And every archive, as Priyanka mentioned at the beginning, has to do their best to deal with existing standards and create their own policies. To looking at the international standards that we tried to uh, to use and we were able to access. And I think many of you who have started in more recent years with the internet uh, would not understand how hard it was in 1982 and the 80s to access international material, to access what are international standards, to get material that was relevant to our work in audiovisual archiving, which was a field not very well known, and nor was ethnomusicology. So for physical preservation, it's maybe the easiest thing to do. We have followed what are the standards laid down by the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives. It's a professional body with which we and I have been very involved with in the last few years, including we hosted a conference here in 2012. So physical preservation for an archive like ours, which has a great deal of analog material, is very, very important. When we started, the word metadata, of course, did not exist. We're talking about cataloging. So cataloging standards were there with the Library of Congress, with the AACR2, that's the Anglo-American cataloging rules, which had some um, guidelines for audiovisual media, but not a lot, and not a lot for cultural materials and so on, until the YASA cataloging rules came along, uh, which gave us many guidelines. By then, of course, we had to set up uh, our systems more or less based on these things. When we talk about metadata, there are many international standards available today. Uh, we used a lot of things that were based on Dublin Core, like a lot of people did, but there are the METs and MODs, the metadata extendable terms, and so on that were used then. And a lot of people worked on the kind of terms we need for audio and video. And we tried to incorporate as many of them as possible. The law and ethics are two very different areas, but I still feel ethics is a very, very important point for all archives, and it again permeates every area we work in. Now, today there are many professional societies with which we are involved who have their own ethics manuals, ethics statements, and I've put a few of them here that we have referred to create our own standards. The Society for Ethnomusicology, the IASA, again, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, and more recently, the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention also has its own ethical statement. So I feel that the one constant in working in archiving is change. It's a constant change, and accommodating change is our main challenge. So we have to look at the international standards on the one hand and look at our own institutionals, its structures and challenges, and try and see what we can do by melding these. So in terms of our standards that we could develop for cataloging, we looked at various requirements of audiovisual archives, the kind of standards and requirements that they have. Since we're looking at ethnomusicology as our field area, as our subject or our focus, we had to look at, now you may say, how does this enter cataloging? It does, because you want to bring in aspects such as context of performance, ethnographic and other cultural information that is part of it. So if the kind of system we developed actually uses context as a linchpin, we worked everything around context. That's how we designed it. Also, we had that we are in India, we're in South Asia, that has its own requirements. We are not a world archive that we have to then come down to small area of culture. We are starting with India, which means the kind of detail that we are expecting and are expected from is fairly more detailed. Also, we are like many a repository model. That means the information on collectors, collections, and all this has to be made part of our systems. And this again affects the rights and ethics and so on, because you're dealing with other collections. What are some of the main challenges have been in this area has been digitization, that you had to move from what we call cataloging of objects to metadata of digital files, and how to accommodate this in what you've been doing. With the internet comes the expectation of remote access. That's been the biggest challenge. And underlying it all is the fact of legacy materials, of legacy data. By the time the internet comes along, we have had 15 years of cataloging analog material. Now, how you cannot afford to redo it all. So how do you bring in metadata standards into what you do? How do you export that kind of data and make it relevant to your metadata? So these were some of the challenges we dealt with. Unfortunately, 10 minutes does not give us the time to go into details of each of these as our earlier two speakers were able to do. The other part of accommodating change has, of course, been change in user expectation. And this works in two ways. It's what we think the user should get, as well as today what users expect has been changing as we go along. There's also the target audience. We have moved from being an archive that was solely for scholarly purposes, for a scholarly audience where scholars deposited, to a more community looking archive. We work a lot more with communities now. We think of communities and performers as part of our audience. We think of uh, working with communities when we do our field projects and so on. So the kind of target audience we're looking at has also changed. And one of the changes that all of us have to be constantly aware of and keep uh, amending our own standards and procedures and policies are changes in copyright law. With us, with audiovisual archiving and ethnomusicology, major changes in 1992, 97 uh, came into the picture for recordings, for performer right, and so on, aspects which we had to incorporate into our policies. So to give you a very brief idea, the way we are structured, our hierarchy within archiving goes, and this I'm dealing just with our unpublished audiovisual materials because they are the core of our archive. So we have collection on the top level, then what used to be tape and is now file, and then at the most detailed level, we have item or track. So you have a certain records that are there across the board for all of these. And what we try and aim for is the item or track, which is every little bit on a recording, each performance, and has as many as 45 fields where we try to deal with all the forms of context, of the performers, of all the musical information and so on. There is also accompanying material which is tied up at all levels. Some of it may be relevant to connect at the collection level or the tape or file level or the item level. Now, these could be materials that come with the audiovisual collections. They are documents, photographs, ephemera, even publications. And we collate this information. So we tie up every record with the accompanying information. I should also add, though, that in more recent years, we have now independent collections of documents, of drawings, of images, which are now not just accompanying material, but archival material in their own right. So what are the kind of lessons we've learned, and what are the kind of tools that I think we should all work towards creating? I think the biggest challenge is standardization and accuracy. So whatever we can do, and I was very happy to hear the earlier two speakers dealing with this issue, how do we deal with standardization? Because unless we create it, you're going to have too much variation, which does not work for retrieval. It is very, very hard to enter everything with very few people. Even if we say we ask various people to enter, the tools to promote accuracy are very important, because I see this in a lot of online metadata is the lack of accuracy, which does not then lead to any kind of standard. So when you're creating your own system and your own tools, we also need to remember flexibility and keeping your structures dynamic, because your needs will change as we discussed so far, and you cannot be caught in a system which will not allow you to make those changes in your structure as time goes on. Scalable models is something that we all know, and yet I have come across archives and collections who have got stuck with their systems because they could not upscale. The kind of software they were using did not allow more than a certain amount of records, or did not allow them to move the data onto the internet and so on. So when you choose your software platform, you have to make sure that it's scalable and that your ability to export to kind of standard systems which will allow you to bring it into something else. Like today, we are all looking at being able to export to Excel at the very least. Also, something that the earlier speakers talked about is the importance of creating thesauri, and ontologies. I think this is the biggest suggestion, I think, most important thing, that more we create these, and a lot of these are, as people said, some of parts of it are available online. You've got resources like Getty for images, but fewer for others. And some of our work has been to try and create our own ontologies and our own thesauri related to Indian music and performance. The other is to document all our systems. It is extremely important that, because anybody who's doing it finds it very evident, if we don't document all our tools and document how our systems work, it becomes very difficult to sustain it. And it's also a very important training tool as we all go on, and we know that all our staff will change all the time, and we need to be able to hand over our systems smoothly and seamlessly to a next generation if archives have to carry on. So ontologies brings me to what I feel is the future for us to look at, which is the semantic web. Uh, I'm hoping this works. So this is the introduction to the, I feel, one of the better sites for what the semantic web is. So which will allow us to connect a lot of things, all kinds of data with each other. And I think this is the direction in which I would I would look at us moving, especially in the world of audiovisual archives, but I think that it's there for a lot of others as well. Let me see. Yes. So coming to the end, what is the kind of online access that ERC has been able to create for itself? It's not maybe been the most successful because of all the problems I talked about: legacy data, moving to metadata, trying to create standards, moving from being a walk-in access to a remote access where you do not have users who understand the context in which you're existing. So we have an online catalog in progress, and we hope to be on in in a few months. We do have, however, we are part of our institutional virtual museum of image and sound. And just to show you a quick peep of, we have 3 interfaces in which our materials can be accessed. We have mapping music, we have a timeline, and music in context, which is, as I said, we look at context as being our linchpin. So we've got various categories here: raga and context, ritual traditions, life cycle, and so on. And each of these open up and give you more categories under each of them. And then it allows us to then share samples with the audience. You've got small information about the genres. You've got, if you're interested, then you can read the track information and you can play a sample. So now again, as I mentioned, the importance of dynamic, we've kept this very dynamic. So we're able to update data under these conditions. categories, we can create new categories and so on. And it allows us to, it's a curated look at material. It's not like a catalog. So it's a more curated approach, but it allows us to share our holdings with you. The other, oh dear. Okay. The other online space that we have is we contribute about 200 tracks to the Folkways at the Smithsonian Institution, where full tracks are available for paid downloads, from which performers get 25% of the sales royalties. So just to show you the kind of albums that we have put up online there, again, it's a curated look at the materials. So these are some of the albums that we have put up there, and you can see each of these has 10 or 12 tracks, but we also have very, very full information. We provide a lot of what are called liner notes with each of these, so that everywhere where we try our best to provide as much documentation as well as the audiovisual media. Now, all that documentation means there's metadata at the back of it. Each of these sites, each of these have their own content management systems. So you have to have systems that will work and allow us to move on to all of these other platforms. So that's a brief look at what ARC has been doing, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shubha.
I'm going to get out of this share. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, you just have to go to the top.
I know I'm at the top. For some reason, my mouse is going a bit lunatic on me. Oh dear. Kya ho raha hai idhar? Okay. Maybe you can. Okay.
There we go. No, no, perfect. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions at the end about all the presentations that have happened so far. We'll end with Venkat speaking about the NCBS archive. Venkat, are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, let me just give this a shot. Is that working?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay, thanks so much for this, and thanks, Shubha, for many of the comments that you raised. And in particular, I wanted to highlight one thing that you'd said about how difficult it must have been early on, in a way that the archives at NCBS started out just a few years ago, and it has entirely benefited from having so much material out on the web and such. I am going to, yeah, okay. So I'm just going to, there's be a bunch of stuff I will not be talking about, which is I'm not going to be talking about sourcing, how we figure out what enters the archive. I will not be talking about digitizing, will not be talking about digital preservation. So I'm going to just try and focus around description standards and just share what we have done so far. And we're open to comments, feedback, critique, and such. A quick couple of slides. The archive at NCBS is a center for the history of contemporary biology in India, or broadly South Asia. It's a collecting public archive. It's a thematic archive. It is not an institutional archive, although there is material from within NCBS in the archive. So that's just the physical space. Whenever the lockdown and such ends, we hope we'll have people come over and visit. This is just the front page of the website, and you're welcome to browse through it. Most of it should be functional. If there are bugs, please tell us. I'm just going to walk through how it's structured. There are about 18 collections, about 50,000 objects, and about 6 sort of genres of content, including oral histories, equipment, books, and of course textual records in terms of manuscripts and such.
Make it slideshow.
Sorry?
Make it slideshow, full screen.
Sorry, thank you. Okay. Is that full screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So just to give an overview of what this is like in a sense, right? So you enter this archives website and you want to be able to search as a user. So I'm just giving the user's point of view, that you want to be able to search and find results for whatever you search. At least that's how people expect things to happen today. And there are a couple of ways of looking at what happens at that point. You can either go into a descriptive result, which is traditionally what is called the finding aid of an archival collection. And there are a couple of open source systems that I'll talk about, archive space and access to memory. And there are a variety of them, and I'll give a link towards the end. Or there is a space for sharing digital objects or digital surrogates, or however you want to phrase that. And this goes into the arena of digital asset management systems and such. I will not be talking about that space, but that is something which could require an entire week of conversation at some point. So I will focus on the finding aid of how we go about the description. So as a user, you'll basically click the catalog that is on top. There's a button, and that will take you to what we use an open source system called Archives Space. And this is available for anyone to download and test with. And this is the front page of the open source system for the catalog. And we have everything bucketed around collections in the archive. So everything has a certain very clear hierarchical structure. And in this case, it's the collections of an individual scientist named Ravi Sankaran, who has nothing to do with NCBS. His family donated his material to the archives. So this is sort of the high level sort of structure of this. And this is sort of a detailed finding aid structure around correspondence, published material, field notes, administrative documents, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of the arrangement that we came up with based on an understanding of the individual. Does everyone see my ILEO thing as well? Does that show up? I hope not.
No.
Anyway. Okay. This is just a quick, as a user, if you type in the word radio, as I did a few days ago, this is what shows up. And there's a bunch of options around the word radio. And eventually, as a user, you might find that you're particularly interested in this particular script from 1968. And this is the file or the folder level description of this particular item in the archives. And you could figure out how to cite it if you want to cite it, or if you want to make a request to the archives, you will basically ask for this identifier. So I'll walk you now through the back end of what this means at our system. Right? So there are 3 levels of description that I will be looking at. One, as I said, is the finding aid description. The second is a prototype that we put together for digital objects. And the third is a broad schema that we have for oral histories. So the structures that we follow are fairly standard to most archives in the tradition of, I would say, the European archival structure. Want to keep in mind that there are a variety of archives that don't necessarily have to follow this. There's no need, but this is at least something that the International Council on Archives has also recommended. There is a very clear hierarchical series and sub-series sort of structure to this. And each collection, like the Sankaran collection that I had shown you, will have 3 descriptive documents to it. It'll have an accession record, it'll have a descriptive summary, and it'll have what we call a container list, which is the folder level description of the item inside it. The standards that we follow are broadly sort of traced back to the International Standards for Archival Description, which was published by the International Council on Archives. This is freely available on the web. It has 26 odd elements, but just to keep in mind, there are 6, I think, 6 essential elements. Everything else is optional for the archive to use. There is a reference code, a title, a creator. Sorry, there's a typo there, not creator. Date, extent, and the level of the description. This is not a prescriptive document, right? It's a protocol, and different countries around the world have adopted or implemented versions of this. The United States, which has an archival association called the Society of American Archivists, developed a framework, a content standard, if you will, called Describing Archives, a Content Standard, which is an implementation of this ISADG in the United States. Canada has one called, I think, Resources for Archival Description. I forget the full form, I'm sorry. And so various countries have one of these. And so we've just adopted this as something that works because it's, again, publicly available and it works fairly well. Again, this is also available on the web, easy enough to download, and they have updated it as of 2019. So it's all on GitHub and very easily readable. So first of all, the 3 documents that I'd shared, there's an accession record for the Sankaran papers, and this is our accession record, and this is what it looks like on archive space. And I've just populated on the right-hand side with a list of all the fields that we use for this. Now, there are a variety of other optional fields. These are things that we have sort of made as being necessary for each accession that we make. And of course, these are open for change over a period of time. So this is roughly the set of fields, and this is primarily a way of knowing what enters the archive, because very often our material stays unprocessed because of a lack of resources, sometimes for many, many months on end. So the accession record is very important for us to just get a sense of when something came and what it was like when it came in. There is, after that, I'm just going to look into the descriptive summary, what I had mentioned as being the detailed description of this collection. And this has, again, a set of fields, or, this is part of the protocol that we have to say that regardless of what collection you have, this collection should have a title, should have an identifier, should have a creator, someone who is sort of the owner or the author of this material, an abstract, an extent of the dates, the nature of access that one can have, the nature of publication, a biographical note, extent, which is basically what is the volume of the material, which is very important, especially for historians who sometimes are trying to look at an archival resource, 2 continents away. And if they see that the extent is only 1 paper, they're just not going to apply for funding to visit that archive. They might just try and access that virtually or in some other method. And the other details, most important, I think, at least from an archival perspective for the backend, is to have a detail on the condition description, because that detail will then feed into priorities for conservation within the archive. And then this is what I'm showing here is, so I'll just go back a slide here. In this collection organization, you can sort of drill down and have a look at the detailed finding aid structure. And within that, I'm just looking at one particular folder. So starting from all the way to the top, right into the space, to a particular folder similar to what I had shown earlier. This happens to be meteorological data from a particular national park in between 1984 and 91. And it has this sort of an identifier, has a description. And so let me just walk through what this means. Again, at the folder level, right? So this is the smallest unit of description that we have when it comes to the finding aid. These are the fields that we require. Largely location, and so what we would call an intellectual arrangement of the material, the series and sub-series. And and this is where it ties into what Shubha had mentioned, which is trying to understand the context of the material. Where does it belong in the understanding of this person? And the other 2 fields are more physical location, and then there's a title and a description. And the structure largely follows what we have from the ISA-DG protocol. Just to break down what this is similar to what Menaka had shown in her slide. MS is manuscripts, 4th manuscript, series, sub-series, box number, container number, and if there's a digital record, this is the 4th digital file in this particular folder. Yeah. This slide is very, very data heavy. I just wanted to sort of just highlight that there are a variety of schema, metadata, and standards out there. If you are a library primarily, you may not find any of this relevant. You might look at something like the MARC XML for what you want to work with. If you're a newspaper, you may find the METS schema as being something that, or the standard that you want to work on. So we are very, very specific about what this place is. It's an archive. It's not a library. It primarily has manuscript-like records at this point. And everything that I've talked to you about metadata, there's a really nice summary file here which talks about all these, how do you think about metadata, schema, and standards. So I encourage all of you to try and just look for this, this resource, and I can share it later. But I just wanted to clarify that all the details that I'm sharing are what we would call descriptive metadata, not looking into the technical metadata around an object and such. Avehi talked about vocabulary quite a bit, so I don't need to touch upon the things that she said. But yes, there are a few different control vocabularies that exist out there. But as Shubha mentioned, there is a very, very strong need to develop ontologies or find ways to find ways of having more inclusive vocabulary to take into account different ways of description. And this is something that Prasun, Bhanu, and Dinesh will sort of talk about in the second half of this session. So just wrapping up with a couple of things here, there is a, if we want to look at the digital objects, there is a search button on the top of the website, which is just a very simple prototype. And so sort of a prototype of about 400 odd objects. And if you were to search for some random thing, like I did some time ago, This is no longer valid because we had to remove a few things, but it's not a very good search. There'll be a bunch of options that will come up, and this is eventually what the digital object page looks like, with its own set of what I would call metadata at this point. And there's a way for you to download the metadata and also download the digital object. And there's a way to cite it if you wish to cite it. This is what the the digital object looks like. And the backend for this, again, that's what I showed you there, was a user perspective. The backend for this, almost everything that we have done has always sort of been preceded by a CVS or some sort of spreadsheet. This is no different. So all the digital objects that we have follow a 25 field metadata sheet. And these are all the fields. And again, I can share those fields at some point if people are interested. But broadly, it tries to capture similar details, except the difference between this and the finding aid is that we are looking at things at the item level. The finding aid goes up to the level of a folder, which may have, let's say, 15 different letters. And the digital object space will have 15 metadata rows for each of those papers or the letters. Yeah. Finally, oral histories. Avehi's talked about this. Nice to notice that she also dropped a link into the chat window on descriptions, and I think that's really great. What we do here is probably a little more simple. We have basically a catalog record, which is not up on the web yet. And this is something that a lot of people are working on right now. So these are all the fields that we try and capture for oral history summaries. Oops, are you guys now seeing my 2-minute break?
No, I'm able to see your slide, Venkat.
Sorry, my screen is locked out. This is fantastic. Anyway, so I don't know what slide you're seeing, but unfortunately I have to wait for 2 minutes, but I'll just try and explain to you.
Oral history.
Oral history summaries.
Thank you. So the summaries basically are a space. We are not doing transcripts. We try and do only summaries of oral history interviews. And for us, the audio file is the archival record, not the transcript at this point. It's just not sustainable for us to do transcripts. And there's also some other issues around transcripts that we can talk about, at least for us at this point. And that space is one where we have a detail of the date, we have creator records and such. But the additional thing that we try and do there is to try and understand vocabulary. So we draw largely from the Library of Congress's subject headings for the subjects, except if we're not able to find a subject there, we go ahead and try and use the Library of Congress's subject heading at the high level, and then we have a narrower description from that to describe something that is very particular in the interview. The work that I'm showing on the screen is work done by Varuni, who is a volunteer and also an intern in the archive. She might be on the call right now. The other thing that we do is try and attach name records. So, what are the names of places and people and institutions that are being referred to? And this is called the Library of Congress Name Authority file. And both of these are freely accessible and can also be downloaded off of the web to run your own scripts from and such. So these are sort of two spaces that I just wanted to highlight in terms of other standards that we use. There is, of course, a set of standards that one can talk about in terms of storytelling and narratives, and that might be maybe a different discussion to have. But there are places, there are softwares like Omeka, which will do that. Let me see. Yeah, but in general, I cannot overemphasize how amazing this collection management system catch-all spreadsheet is made by Ashley Bluer, which is available again on the web. And people can edit, add. There are more than 75 different software systems that have been described here. So I really encourage people to have a look at it and see what works for them and what doesn't. And the other one that I did not talk about is access to memory. For those of you who were there on Tuesday, you might have, or maybe it was Wednesday. Madan from the Azim Premji University talked about using this for their archival records. And it's a really, really good tool as well to use. I will wrap up with this. I'm sorry if I overshot my time. Thanks, Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Venkat. Okay, so now it's already 11:35. Do you want the Q&A to extend in the next round, or do you think we should do the Q&A now?
Let's just do it now. If you are okay with it, and we'll take a 10-minute break after.
Okay, fabulous. We have two questions, plus I think I'd seen a hand raised earlier. Reena Patel, would you, Reena Patel, would you, maybe you can ask your question. Let me just, can we unmute her, Sangeeta?
Hello.
Hi, hi.
Hi. I want to ask to the Mr. Venkat. He is telling about that that is softwares, that is the disk space and that archive space. They are using both the softwares.
No, we are not using DSpace. They have completely different purposes. Archive space is an example of an archival description system. It is primarily used for sharing your finding aids. It is also primarily used as the backend tool for the archive to create accession records and everything else around it. DSpace would be something that we have explored. It would, I would say, primarily be used for digital objects. I've seen it being used by institutional libraries quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are, if you're really interested in a university that has used both, I would encourage you to have a look at Georgetown University in the US that has done an integration of archive space and DSpace.
Okay, thank you so much. I am from the IIM Ahmedabad. Right now I am working in Vikram Sarabhai, working on the archives. So I want to interested. So that's why I asking you. Right now we are working on this space. That's why.
Yeah, and there's a fairly large community in India that works on DSpace, and yeah, I'm happy to connect
Basically,
you to
we
a
are
couple
just
of
giving the some records put on the archives. That is the disk space. Okay, thank you so much.
people.
So, and one question I have, that is the Shobha, Miss Shobha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the that is you are doing only your own softwares or in Excel only and put on the web. That is the
No. I was only mentioning Excel as a useful thing on which you might want to incorporate your own system for exporting, because Excel being CSV files are easy to bring into anything else. So that if you use a proprietary software, you should be sure that it's not something you get stuck in. We've used RDBMS called Paradox for many, many years, until it became completely obsolete. And now we're having our own software development done on a Linux platform, which will incorporate our older data.
okay. And one thing I have to ask, that is the for digital that is digitization of objects. So you are digitized in both the files in high resolution and low resolution and put on the web.
Uh, no, we only put low resolution on the web.
Yeah, for but you have to digitize high resolution and then put on low
We
resolution.
digitize
So you
everything high
kept
resolution. Yeah, everything high resolution in terms of images, also high resolution in terms of, so we make TIFF files with high resolution. We have raw files for things that we shoot ourselves. And in terms of audio and video, we